Appreciate everyone joining us. My guest, Marc Kestecher, who I've worked with for many years along the way at ESPN Radio. Marc, if there is a decathlon for a number of broadcast events that I've had the chance to work with you on, various sports, I think I've hit them all. You are a man of all seasons, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, great to be on with you, Dave. And yes, I always say, people ask me, what makes a good play-by-play broadcaster, especially radio. And I think you would agree, when you work with people that have done what you've done and have an extra set of eyes, and I don't think people realize how much information is coming into my ear in real time as we talk, that has made me a better person. So I thank you for that, and it's great to be on with you.
You have worked for a company that the call letters alone, the 4 letters, mean so much when you drop your verbal business card. What has working for ESPN meant to you, Marc?
I never thought I would have the opportunity. In my 20s, my broadcasting home was in Albany, New York, and Cleveland, Ohio. And at those times, ESPN Radio was in the early stages of weekend night programming, and it was the best of the best broadcasters, from talk show hosts to update anchors to the guests themselves. And so that was never, in my mind, an end game for me. I always thought it was going to be play-by-play somewhere with a team. So when I got an audition in 1998, I had been in Cleveland for a couple of years. It was quite a daunting experience to walk into that studio with Tony Bruno and Chuck Wilson and Todd Wright, and one of them had to get up so I could sit down and do the updates. So when I got hired there and I was 30 years of age, I realized, I'm like, I cannot believe that, I'm working at this place in this behemoth in Bristol. So I know everyone says, don't make your job, don't let it become what you are and what you're all about, your essence, because someday that train's going to end and you have to be you. But after 27 years, it's hard for me to separate ESPN Radio and myself. So it's meant the world to me for my career. It's all been first-class people from day one. So very fortunate to have had this job path.
You know what? It's interesting. The former head of ESPN, George Bodenheimer, for many years, I think his story was that he did literally start in the mailroom, if I remember right. You didn't start in the mailroom, Marc, but I mean, you were doing updates. And I always thought that you mastered your craft unlike any other. You became great at what you did, but what has it been like to just kind of work your way and take opportunities when they're laid in front of you?
Yeah, the update was really, my entree to ESPN and ESPN Radio. And I just golfed with Jay Reynolds, who has been the overnight update anchor and all night with Jay Reynolds for years. And I told him, we reminisced about, while we're golfing, I said, when I got hired from Cleveland, my wife said, what do you think your day part's going to be? And I said, well, I'm sure Jay Reynolds is going to get moved out of overnights and I'll be the overnight guy. And then Len Weiner, who was then the general manager of ESPN Radio, said, I didn't hire you to do overnights, and I was, 4 p.m. to midnight. And so, I had a good laugh with Jay, because he has mastered that midnight, 1 a.m. through the night. It's not an easy show that he does, and he does a great job of it. So I appreciate the kind words, but for me, I always wanted to do play-by-play, and I wasn't getting anywhere when I was sending in my tape and resume to teams in the 90s. And, I found this niche doing updates on a local level in Albany and then on a local level in Cleveland. And I figured, I probably bit off a little more than I can chew doing these ESPN radio updates. I remember John Stashower was there, and to me, he was the king of the update. And I just watched at what ease he prepared and did them. And I told my wife, I said, I'm not sure how long I'm going to last here because I don't think I could do what he does. And it took me a while to get my footing, to find all the different shortcuts you need to be able to put on, 3 sportscasts an hour. And then there was a time when I felt incredibly comfortable. I did it for 18 years at ESPN Radio. And the navigation part of getting into our studio production with our MLB and our NBA and other things, that just happened by chance. My second year on a Sunday night baseball in September, I don't know if it was Bob Stevens or Rich Eisen. I always say Rich Eisen, but I'm not sure. The TV guys were often the studio hosts in those early years. And Rich was sick or unavailable on that Sunday night. And John Martin, the chief, was the head of remote at the time. And I was doing a Sunday afternoon update shift. And he said, hey, I might need you to stay. and it was Yankees Red Sox, and Pedro Martinez was pitching. It was a big early September regular season game. Pedro ended up striking out like 17. It was a big game. And that was my first studio event. And I got really good reviews from the chief, as we call him, John Martin. And that started that. And then I remember I filled in as a sideline person, which, by the way, you make that seem so easy. It was my one and only. I did the Sugar Bowl sidelines. I think it was Georgia against Florida State in New Orleans, obviously. And Chief took us to I think they were then the Hornets, maybe not the Pelicans. They had a New Year's Eve NBA game. And in those years, they would just give us 2 seats courtside. They weren't selling all those Jack Nicholson seats yet. And I remember looking at Chief in the middle of this NBA game in 2003, whatever it was. And I said, Chief, this is what I am meant to do. My goal in life is to be an NBA radio broadcaster. It didn't work out for me in my 20s, and maybe the time has passed me because I found a way to ESPN as an update anchor, and now I'm working, as a studio host. And the odds of becoming a play-by-play when you're, in the studio, it's very low. So I remember that was a turning point because I told him that. And then I was doing studio in 2004, and Fred Carter, the great, 76er, greatest player on the worst team in history, we like to say, we worked the finals together. And I said, Fred, if I've come to Philadelphia this fall, I can't pay you very much, or if anything, I'm just a radio guy, trying to make ends meet. Would you be my analyst for a game? And I hired a local engineer, and he had recording apparatus. The Sixers were nice enough. They put me in the Flyers booth. So we were in the hockey booth, which wasn't great, but I'm in an NBA arena. And Fred Carter and I did a quarter of NBA basketball. And that was the tape I gave to John Martin, the chief. And I said, if you need somebody, let me know. And within a year or two, I was doing a college basketball game, and that's how it all began.
Well, as people are watching this, you could definitely see that Marc enjoys what he does. Sometimes it brings up stories in my mind, and you'll know what this is like. I like to brag about the power of radio still. I know that a lot of people will think of ESPN and they'll think about TV, Marc, but you've been on the radio. People get a chance to experience it in their cars on Saturday afternoons and on drives. And one of those weekends when I was hosting all by myself there on ESPN radio, I remember John Calipari called in the day before the NCAA tournament field was announced and said he was in his backyard in Lexington just getting fired up about the basketball tournament, wanted to know if I wanted him to go on the air. It's just one of those, kind of the power of sports kind of moments. And I'm sure you've had a lot. What has radio as a medium meant to you?
Yeah, it's meant everything. When I was younger, probably subconsciously, at nighttime, putting on the radio before bed. I had an odd circumstance in my house growing up in that my parents were upstairs. My sister was upstairs. We were in a raised ranch. I had the whole downstairs to myself, a living room with a TV, bed with a radio. And even though I had to be up, at 6 a.m. to go to school, I'm talking 9th grade, 10th grade, I was going to bed pretty much whenever. No one's paying attention. And so the Larry King show on Mutual used to be on every night, 11 o'clock, midnight, all through the night. And there was this theater of radio that Larry was so good at that had me so fascinated. I had to listen every night. I didn't understand half the stuff going on. I was a sports guy, and, there was a lot of politics and real world stuff happening. But I just remember being captivated by it, especially story time. And you put that with sports and me realizing that these minor league teams in the Albany, New York area where I grew up in upstate New York, AA baseball had a radio broadcast. The CBA Albany Patroons basketball team had a radio broadcast. Fascinated me to no end. And I'm like, maybe that's what I would like to do. And my parents, of course, were like, yeah, that's not a job. Radio announcer's not a job.
Go to school for something else. Yeah.
I went to Syracuse University for chemical engineering, and within 2 years I was washing out, and that's one of the greatest broadcast schools of all time. And I had a lot of friends at Newhouse, and for 1 year, my junior year, I wavered into every course I could. I just junked it up. Got a great internship with the AA Albany Yankees, and I was on my way from there in a very unconventional way. And so as oftentimes I've been asked, to do these television games for ESPN, and I still feel like a fish out of water all these years later at 57 years of age. But you put on a pair of headsets for a radio broadcast or an update shift, And there's just something magical about it. It's so one-on-one with the person in the car that's driving, or, now everything's changed in our medium, and, there's streaming, and streaming habits are odd and different. But I just love the opportunity and the challenge to bring something you can't see to life.
Yeah.
And that to me was the magic growing up. And, we all steal from our heroes. And I don't know what my play-by-play is stolen from, but it's an amalgam of all kinds of great announcers. And then it becomes kind of your own.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, we're all influenced by someone. Growing up and listening with that radio at home, I was listening to Jack Buck and Mike Shannon, call the Cardinals when I was growing up. And you were around so many great TV sportscasters at ESPN as well. How did you prevent yourself from feeling like you had to find a shtick, one that maybe was repeated that someone else had already done, and just kind of finding your own style, Mark?
Yeah, what's interesting is all these years later, I talk to people and they're like, what's, people that are not in the business that you meet outside in the everyday world. And they're like, so what's your big catchphrase? And I'm like, you know what? I think I failed. I don't really have a good catchphrase. I'm such a straight down the middle national broadcaster. I'm sure there's a couple things I say I say a lot. I always joke that, I use the same 60 words over and over again for 2.5 hours at a time. But there is one person in particular that's always in the back of my mind, and it's Jim Durham, the great Chicago Bulls announcer who passed away in 2012, and of course was our NBA on ESPN radio announcer for years and years, and I was his studio host, so we worked together a lot, and I heard him a lot, and he was one of my influences. I told him this, when he was alive in the 90s. I used to get the Chicago radio station in Albany. We'd get all these big 50,000 watt flamethrowers, throughout the upper Midwest, even all the way to St. Louis. So I always tried to avoid JD's sayings because to me, I had so many games with him. I try never to say he's got it stuck in automatic because it's one of the first things I hear in my head when a guy's hit threes in a row. Don't do it. Don't do it. But every once in a while, there was one that he didn't use often that I have stolen, and it was straight down the well. It was such a great, his basketball term. You could almost see Naismith, through the peach basket and down
the well.
So I love that one. And, the free throw line, he's at the nail. That's a great descriptor. JD didn't use that one. I don't know who uses that, but I hear it every once in a while. I love that. He's at the nail. So there's things you can't avoid stealing, but JD is one. He had 5 or 6 in his back pocket. And outside of down the well, I've avoided the other 4.
All right, we're going to wind through a couple of topics. Let me just ask you, because you call what you see, and so you often don't get to give your opinion, but you've seen sports evolve over the years. We've talked about it at dinners when we're out of town working games. Years ago, when the concept of will or should college athletes be paid, did you ever think we'd see it to the level that we are seeing it right now with NIL and what it has brought?
No, not at all. I mean, even if you brought me the concept, the true concept of name, image, and likeness, a guy who is a star basketball player and can't even cash in on, jersey sales because, you couldn't even buy the guy a bagel with cream cheese, at one point it was so restrictive. So even true NIL, I never knew that day would come. And then when it did come and we're all like, all right, how's this going to work? And then the pendulum swung so fast into essentially pay for play where recruiters are showing up, and I've never been in there, but everything you hear is, all right, how much is the first thing before it's, let's talk about the school and where it is. And you want to come for a visit and, what do you want to study? Stuff like that. It's how much. And the amount of money, I don't think any of us, even 5 years ago when this all began, could have imagined to where it is now. I don't know where it's going. With the House settlement, there'll probably be some guardrails somewhere. Maybe we'll get it, to where it's apples to apples, from the big 2 conferences in the SEC and the Big Ten onto the next, tier with ACC and the Big 12 beyond that. So it's fascinating, and you can foresee a time, when we're just you and I are just watching, we're out of the game, 20, 25 years from now, where we say, remember that Wild West period? Guys were getting paid $7 million as an 18-year-old on campus. It's really unfathomable. I don't take anything away from these guys getting it. It's just there's no way to drag it. You know what I mean? Like, at least in the professional sports, we're a generation now removed from where the number one pick in the draft,
Yeah.
could hold out, could go to another team, could get the most dollars. And now there are rookie slots that have, made a lot of sense. So there'll come a day where college sports are there, but it's so much more complicated because of the nature of the college sports, all the different sports, the different leagues, the different level of leagues. Somebody very smart's going to have to figure this all out at some point.
Let me give you another great one, because you talk about a tsunami of how it came upon us. What about the subject of gambling? Because as a broadcaster, how many times did we go through, and especially when you're involved with leagues or teams, you're really going under strict guidelines that you are not doing this, 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 and this. And now you almost hear it in every broadcast, some sort of reference. How hard or smooth of a transition has that been to integrate that into what content that a lot of your listeners probably want to know?
Yeah, it's been a heavy discussion for us in-house over the years. I think as kind of a non-bettor and somebody who doesn't totally understand what's going on, it's made it easy for me because I have
Good.
largely avoided it. Our studio hosts have been much more savvy with that over the years, and I let them do it. I'm like, if you want to, come back in the fourth quarter in a 3-point game and say, hey, by the way, there might be some people very interested in, the outcome of this final drive. So I think, that part is somewhat funny. I do think, look, there's a lot of money, and I understand. I've been in seminars where league commissioners have said, look, the betting's going to happen with or without us. And if we can be a part of it and we can help regulate it, maybe that's in our best interest. And I think they're still trying to figure out, the guardrails there. The really hard part, and especially from the college age kids and even the pros, is the prop betting. And it's, we know it's fun. Like on a Super Bowl, I'll list like 20 prop bets for my wife and daughter who don't pay attention to sports, but it keeps us in the game.
Yep.
And we're playing, for, $10 or something. But it's a serious subject. Prop betting is amazing, not amazing in that it's an amazing thing to do. It's just, it's widely used, and it's, can be fun. It's different. It's interesting. It's short term. You're picking out something beyond just a game, win or loss. And so when it's a player who's involved, two things. One, that player doesn't live up to the bet you made. And now, you have someone who might have a vendetta against you because you cost us, you missed the shot, and I can't pay my mortgage this month. And the other one is, and we've seen this a couple times already, where it's, players who are way down, the 15th guy on the depth chart, and somehow got involved in betting. And, the film raised red flags where, maybe it looks like you're missing shots on purpose, or you came into a game and got hurt. And so now you hit the under on these things. And and guys have gotten in trouble with that. So the prop betting is another thing. I don't know if it goes away, but especially in college where, these athletes, and they're young, they're just out of high school. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They may not know any better at that age. So I think that's, where, there's a lot of gray area that we have to work on.
Here's another interesting one is the amount of data now that people can get. You remember in your early days, I remember mine. Think of all of the years that we actually broadcasted where we didn't need to share anything on social media. We didn't have the likes of the prep material. How much is too much when you're preparing for a game to make sure that you can sleep easy knowing that you have enough information with the amount of information we can get out there now?
Yeah, I battle with that, Dave, a lot. I spend way too much time, especially once we get to NBA season. There's no more football games, and NBA prep is so much easier than college football prep. And you got 200 players, or in my case, I got 400 because we're doing 2 games on week 1, opening week in Atlanta. We have a Saturday and a Sunday game week 1, and so you can prep so much that you almost paralyze yourself. But there's also a difference. There are solo broadcasters in the NBA, so that prep comes to great use. I have an analyst who, PJ Carlissimo, who is a coach who's been around the college and the professional game, and he has a lot of great opinions, and he sees a lot of stuff, and so I don't have as much time to get that in. College football, I have a sideline reporter, Ian Fitzsimmons, and Kelly Stauffer is my analyst, and those guys are chock full of stuff. So it's a long way of saying I over prep. I do appreciate the fact, like you said, with the advance of social media, not only is ESPN giving me all these rundowns, but I follow these, Twitter sites that over the years I've become to trust because, it's all accurate information. So it's on my sheet. I hope it's in my brain when I need it. If it's not, I hope it's on a part of my cheat sheet that I could find at the right time. And believe me, there are times where a game ends and we're back at the hotel and we're having a bite to eat. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot to say that. And then I read in the paper the next day, it was like, not the number one part of the story, but maybe the second or third was that. And I was like, how did I forget to do that? Epic fail. But I always say I use 5 to 10% of my board, which is sad because if you ever seen one of my cheat sheets, and you've
Oh, I
done them
have.
too, they're pieces of art. And unfortunately, if you take your eyes off the field, sometimes you'll miss something important. So I err on the side of, if it's not in my brain and I can't find it easily and keep my eyes on the field, then it's unfortunate. But we get most things in, the important stuff.
Mark, you mentioned PJ, and you've had, I'm going to call it a blessing, right? Because we all have. You've had that blessing to be able to sit next to some Hall of Famers. I'm not going to ask you to pick which one is the most favorite or whatever, but we'll give a couple of shout out here because you have worked with some geniuses.
Yeah, I mean, Will Purdue was on those great Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen teams. The first 3 championships, was really my first analyst. And he was close to my age. So we were in that same grouping. And, he knew all these players now because he had played with some of them. So that was a great way to start. Stan Van Gundy did some radio. People forget, before his Turner years. I got
What a
to
great
work,
guy.
yeah, I got to work with him and, saw his early genius. Like, he's seeing stuff. I'm like, I have no idea. We're watching the same game. How do I don't see this? So that was great. John Barry then became my partner in 2017 when I took over the lead for the NBA on ESPN radio. And JB not only can see the game and grew up, the son of one of the greatest basketball players ever. He was obviously opinionated, growing up the son of Rick Barry. And he was funny as heck. And he was actually ahead of me on things because, my child was born in 1998. So a lot of the culture references, the pop culture references went right over my head. And that delighted him to no end to catch me on those. And then I worked with Hubie Brown for conference finals and finals for a 3-year stretch. And we all love Hubie. We all grew up watching Hubie. Just to be the studio host for the finals when he and the late Dr. Jack Ramsey, 2 Hall of Famers, with whether it was Mike Tirico or Jim Durham, just to be in those meetings was amazing. Then to work with him and, just see how he prepares and what he sees was great. And then I don't want to leave out PJ because he came along after that and he's just a joy to work with. You need to lose at least 20 pounds before the playoffs start because we're going to be in an Italian restaurant.
These guys like to eat, don't they?
11 p.m. after every game. And then you get home from the finals and my wife looks at me and says, hey, Santa Claus, time to soften up a little bit. So
you're going to the broadcasters training camp.
Exactly. So just to work with those guys, and I've left out others and I apologize those I've left out with, but they have made me so much better. And I tell them, and they don't believe me, I still believe I've gotten some of these jobs within ESPN radio because they made me sound good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you'll always remember that. You'll have those memories. And I've been putting some photos up as well because, I always tell people, Mark, I've had the chance to work some baseball or whatever. And of course, in college basketball or the NBA, I will always remember those times we have down in coaches' offices before the game. Isn't there because you think you talk just only about the game, but you talk about the wines or the books they have on the wall there. And those are just some special times.
No, they are. And I'm looking at the Kobe Bryant picture from your days with the Lakers behind you. You could see behind me.
Yeah.
Some just great moments that happen to be captured. And there's nothing better. The NBA treats us so well. The NBA broadcasting department treats us so well. We still get those meetings with coaches before games. And when you get a rapport with somebody, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When you go into Steve Kerr's office, and he's been the coach for the Warriors for a decade now, we've been there the whole time, there's this ease that they feel to talk to us. They still have to be a little on guard because, they don't want to make sure we go to Twitter. They know we don't. We're going to keep that information. But every once in a while, I'm sure there's some trust issues there. But there are coaches in the NBA and in college football that I deal with mostly that sometimes can almost frame your opinion Like, it's not about their team. It's just when hey, did you see last night the end of that a Knicks game? And, PJ might say, yeah, wow, what about that defense, whatever. And it always triggers something with the other coach in a good way where they're like, you know what? We started doing something like that a few years ago. And just those stories, and you find out what's on the record, what's off the record. But those kind of stories that you can build on time after time, you may not even realize that nugget is going to end up on the air. It might be 2 months from now. It could be 3 months from now, whatever it is, but it's all building from these conversations. And when I parachute into baseball, which is very rare these days, but I used to get, one Major League Baseball game a year just to help out with a summer vacation. There was nothing that felt worse than being on a baseball field and realizing I don't know anybody. Nobody knows me. Everybody I go up to, I'm just another guy, and you can't get that good information. Every once in a while, I'd run into somebody like Buck Showalter, who was the manager of the Albany Yankees when I was the intern, 19,
So
whatever.
there's your go-to guy.
So I'm like, Buck, you remember me? And he looked at me. My favorite line was from George Carl. We were in an airport some years ago, and I'm about 6'3", but when I was in high school, I was like 150 pounds. When I was in college, 180, and early in my broadcast career, I was probably about 200. And so George looks at me, and he's kind of squinting, and he goes, "Used to be a shooting guard. Now you're a pulling guard." I'm like, "Thanks, George. I appreciate that."
Those are the things we'll always remember. All right, we're going to end with a little rapid fire. I would join you for over the years for quite a few NFL games. So I would always hear as you pulled the double weekend, you'd be coming from Lincoln or Oxford or Norman, and me producing, I'd be worrying about you all getting in safely. So what's the Marc Kestecher must-have travel tips?
Must-have
you travel a lot.
Yes, we do. First of all, you have to have a great understanding of airports in and around where you're going, especially in the wintertime. So if you can't get to Chicago, can I get to Indianapolis? Where can I drive from? Can I get to, Lexington and drive from there? So you have to have a good understanding of how to get there on the fly. It is amazing. And I know it's supposed to be rapid fire. It is amazing to me that we never miss a game. How's that possible? There's one thing to lose your voice, but you know how the airlines industry is these days. There's not a lot of options. Yeah. So you got to be quick on your feet.
All right. So one more travel thing. It bothers some people when we all stand up as soon as they reach the gate and they hit that button. Some people hate that we stand up. I love standing up right away just because I got to stretch. But
yes,
is it a pet peeve of yours or not?
Not a pet peeve. To me, it's more of a game. When do you undo your seatbelt and how quietly do you do it as you're rolling up to the gate? And I look over to the guy on the other side of the aisle of me, and is he on his phone not paying attention? So as soon as that ding hits, bam, I'm up and I'm ready to go. Because you know me, I live in the Hartford area, so everything is a connection. You can't miss that second flight.
All right, so you're now the everyman because you're calling a lot of games across the country. But if you were working for one team, would you be considered a homer? Do you like that style that people talk about on the air?
I don't mind it. I'm still a sports fan. I've lost most of my teams, but I'm still, a Yankees fan. I don't do a lot of baseball anymore. John Sterling was, I wouldn't call him a homer because he also, kind of cheered for the other team, but, his big home run calls were homer, no pun intended, calls. So I don't mind the homer. I think there's a place for it. It's never been me because outside of my early years in the minor leagues, I've been the national guy. And I remember early in my career, one of our engineers, well, Al Rosenberg, who's been engineer to the stars in radio. And we were doing a game at Madison Square Garden. It was Knicks and Mavericks. And Dirk Nowitzki did something amazing. And I kind of gave it, the road call. There was no cheering. And during the break, Al, in a very nice way, just said, Jim Durham might have gone a little bit more nuts on that call. And I was like, you know what, Al, that's a great point. From that point forward, I remembered, even if it's the visiting player, if he does something amazing on the road, you got to give it that punch.
All right. It's worth a little bit extra time, even though I call it rapid fire. But a young broadcaster comes up to you, Marc, as they do many times. How do I get to do what I'm going to do? What's the elevator pitch?
Yeah, the first thing I say is, do everything, do all sports. I know times have changed, but there's still local broadcasting, local radio. I did boxing once just to get on the air. I had no idea what I was doing, but I wanted to describe, the sweet science. So we did it. So go anywhere, get those opportunities. They're hard to find, but You can kind of, we called it, papering out there, just sending tons of emails, I guess would be the parlance now, to see if you can find something. So it's getting those experiences. It's also, in another subset, not knocking off other parts of the business. Everyone wants to be the play-by-play guy. Maybe they want to be the analyst. Maybe they don't want to be the sideline. But producing is an art. Engineering is an art. And you're still at all those games, and you're doing all the same fun stuff we're doing.
Great piece of advice.
So just don't close off, other opportunities, especially of radio broadcasting.
All right. Some will say, especially in your grayer years, when you get done with your career, that you better have a hobby. What's a hobby for Marc Kestecher?
Oh, I am terrible at hobbies. I love to travel. I haven't really, gone out there and done the big traveling like we did when my daughter was of school age. She graduated college in 2020, actually, right as everything shut down.
I can't believe that.
And we still haven't, really gotten to that big traveling. I still love, and, I'll every once in a while throw a picture. We're in Toronto doing a Raptors game, and on the off day, I go to the Blue Jays game and take a picture. And people, the nice, responses you get, which are few and far between, are, it's good to see that even announcers on their off day still love sports like the rest of us. And I don't think anything different. If I'm in town and there's another game going on, it's one of the first things I do. If we're in New York and there's no Knicks tonight, or the Rangers playing, if it's springtime or fall, Yankees and Mets, are they playing? Is there a minor league team playing, in whatever town we're in? There's a AAA baseball stadium right next to our hotel in Indianapolis, and I could actually watch the game out my back window.
I love that place.
Yeah. So that's kind of my hobby. And I still also listen, to radio broadcasts. It's not like the old days where we're flicking, 100 kilohertz at a time or 10 kilohertz at a time, on streaming. I love to hear what people my age and even the next generation are doing, because, there's always something to borrow. I'm like, wow, I really love how that guy does that. I'm going to try to incorporate that in my games.
Well, you're about ready to start getting very busy. That's why I wanted to make sure that we got you at this point. If people are watching, no matter when it is, it's in August. So, Marc, I look forward to seeing you down the road. Thanks so much for joining us on the Game Plan this week.
I appreciate the invite, and I hope we get to work again soon, because that means it's going to be a good broadcast and a good meal.